I'm a big believer that surfing and the art it inspires it's really legitimate. It's as valid as any other art form, and it's a deep, endless well of inspiration. Surfing, like most of us, just really got its hooks into me. I was fortunate. We travelled a lot as a family when I was a kid. We stopped over in Hawaii in one of our travels. My older brother Pete had surf lessons in Hawaii. It was a bit of a Brady Bunch kind of scenario. And when we came back, he was so smitten that we sort of started having holidays down the coast, down the Mornington Peninsula. And then I started surfing more seriously in high school when my best mate's family had a holiday house at Phillip Island. But surfing was always a mission, like we had to travel. And I think that was actually really formative, because for me it was this great quest just to get to the coast. To go surfing is such a privilege. To paddle out in the ocean is such a reliable source of joy and sustenance, and doesn't ever get stale, never gets old, which is pretty remarkable, 45 years on from, first discovering it. So I did a traditional newspaper cadetship in Melbourne at the Old Melbourne Sun. I was destined for the life of an Aussie Rules footy writer when I saw an ad in Tracks magazine for an associate editor and applied for it with zero expectation. Fortunately for me, the publisher had said that he wanted a proper journalist who surfed a bit rather than a proper surfer who wrote a bit. And so I got the gig, moved from Melbourne to Sydney, did 5 years at Tracks, and got offered the job editing Surfing Life magazine with a view of Burleigh Point, which was a bit irresistible. And then did about 5 years at Surfing Life, did a bit of travelling, and then left magazine land to write a biography of Wayne Rabbit Bartholomew called Busting Down the Door, and discovered I loved writing books and I loved working from home and being freelance and just kind of doing my own thing. And so since then I've just done a variety of things, mainly around surfing history and culture. I guess I look for projects that just sort of light a bit of a fire in my belly. Certainly to write a book, you've got to have a real sense of mission and purpose. But I've got a pretty varied workload across a whole range of projects, from like commercial copywriting for brands, academic work, I'm doing some teaching. I've had to be pretty nimble and pretty adaptable to make a long-term career out of, I guess, the common denominator is storytelling around surfing history and culture. But it's taken lots of different guises, from film and video to theatre to festivals to commercial work to publishing. I guess the lesson is to be nimble and adaptable, and not to have too set an idea of what it is that you do, to be quite fluid in terms of being able to apply a core skill set to lots of different projects. My latest book is called Patting the Shark, and for me that was a real departure. It's a personal memoir, it's a story of my cancer journey. It basically began as therapy. I was sitting here on the couch at home, kind of processing this monumental health challenge that I'd been sort of faced with, and I would just write as therapy with no expectation that anyone would ever read it. And I think that actually is part of its power, because I wasn't being self-conscious and I wasn't really thinking about a reader or an audience. So parts of it are pretty raw and pretty candid, and I think that's what people have responded to. And I also think I learned a lot as a writer, because being a personal memoir, it's really easy for it to become self-indulgent, and there's a real challenge in what I call making the personal universal. So how do I make my story a more universal story? And so there's lots of themes that I think everyone can relate to. And survival is a pretty basic human theme, and then family is a big one, and health, I guess, managing health and having to kind of draw deep within your inner resources to kind of overcome what was a pretty daunting challenge. The feedback I've got from readers, particularly people facing a similar challenge, was that it had been quite therapeutic. So that was hugely satisfying, and I think probably the most impactful thing I've ever done in my working life. It seems a pretty improbable story, even to me, that this kid who grew up in the landlocked eastern suburbs of Melbourne, a long way from the beach, manage to make a life writing about surfing, it seems ludicrous and so far-fetched.